Welcome to Chronicles of a Cult, where we seek to teach the history, doctrine, and application of the modern abortion abolitionism movement. My name is Jacob.
My name is Carson.
My name's Jesus.
I'm sorry, guys. I realized I wasn't. I was muted. I followed instructions, but I was muted. I'm sorry. I messed it up. And this is Shane.
Today's episode will be primarily introducing you to all of us and the most important person in our life, Christ. How we all came to understand him, and how we all came to understand the most important love your neighbor issue in the world today, child sacrifice, otherwise known as abortion. As we give our stories today, we want you to hear how much we love Christ, his bride, and his image bearers. Since we're just starting this podcast, we really want any and all requests from our listeners on topics that they'd like to hear, as well as advice for improving, not relating to production. We know that these things need to be improved, and we'll work on those. So, as I said, my name is Jacob. I'm from Central Texas, and I'm a 1689 Reformed Baptist. So, to kind of start this off, I guess I'll start with my testimony. And my testimony goes back to being a typical SBC kind of Arminian Baptist church, where we have like a Romans Road walkthrough, for those who may know what that is, where I kind of repeat after somebody who's reading out of a tract, and I get to the end and they say, they have me say the sinner's prayer with them. And then 2 weeks later, I'm baptized, and therefore my Christianity starts. And when I think back to that, I think back to how I didn't really know what I was doing. And I was really just following kind of what I was told to do. The reason that all came up was my dad was teaching a Sunday school class. And he brought me with him early so he could go through the lesson plan. And we were sitting in his office, and I was bored. And I asked him, what are you teaching on today? And my dad was like, well, I'm teaching on salvation. And I was like, well, what's that? And he said, you don't know what salvation is? And I was like, no. And so that he had me go with, one of the more senior ladies in the church, Mrs. Nelda, and she walked me through that and had me say the sinner's prayer. And a couple weeks later, I got baptized. So that was the first kind of instance of kind of engaging in theological Christianity, kind of understanding what Christianity is a little bit. I kind of grew up, and there was probably a hint of understanding righteousness a little bit there. Like I remember thinking, oh, this is bad, so I shouldn't do that now. And I know that's just moralism, but as a 7-year-old, like how much deep doctrine should they know to the nth detail before we say they're a Christian, and that's a question for another time, or for a different type of podcast. But I would say that, maybe I was saved and maybe I wasn't. But I do know that throughout my time between then and when I turned 19, I had times of moral clarity and times of, immorality, and most of the time just kind of like treating Christianity as second to everything else. And I was in choir in high school, and in choir I grew to really love singing and music, and especially the people around me in the choir. Kind of grew a really close relationship with a lot of the choir people there. And I kind of, when I turned 19, I moved in with my brother-in-law and sister, in Texas. And I remember us going through a Bible study together, and my dad, we would always go to church every summer when I visited my dad. During the regular year, I would stay with my mom, and we wouldn't really go to church, and Christianity wasn't really at the forefront of anything that we did necessarily. But at my dad's house, it always was. It was the reason for everything. It was the reason for joy. It was the reason for, it was a reason for everything. And so I remember sitting in a Bible study, and we were going through Hebrews. I don't even remember what passage or what chapter or anything. And I just remember being gripped with this, with this conviction that I had claimed to be a Christian, and I had said I was a Christian my whole life. But these people who I claimed to love, that were my, high school choir members, I probably hadn't, in all 4 years attending high school, I probably hadn't mentioned Christ to them even 5 times, not even enough times to fill on one hand. Talked about Christianity, but it was just kind of like this thing that made me the Christian who likes people and who they can get along with. And I kind of realized that the reason they could get along with me was because I wasn't really representing Christ. It's because I wasn't really telling them about salvation. And I don't know if I even believed in salvation myself, because how could I not be gripped by this gospel of a God who loves me and takes on human flesh and dies on the cross for me? How could I be gripped with a truth such as that and not respond with love and adoration and in proclaiming his name to the rest of the world? So there was a change there for sure. I did get rebaptized at that time, me seeing and feeling an obvious change that that made me think, okay, that this is when I was really saved. As I grew in my doctrine, I think maybe that's not true. Maybe it is, but that's for God to know and for me to learn in eternity. So that's from then. It was just that was what set me off. That was what made me desire to know more about evangelism, because I had to tell these people whom I loved, these choir members, about Jesus. And long story short, I did. I mean, I spent so much time studying the scripture and learning about all kinds of different things related to Christianity and answering objections. And I ended up telling a lot of them about Christ and about salvation. But I think to this day, none of them has become a Christian. There's just kind of a separation. They lived in California and I lived in Texas, and God just didn't call them. And that's okay, because I learned a lot through that. And God gave me a particular heart for evangelism, a particular heart for proclaiming his name, that came because I was so convicted of being apathetic and being silent. And that kind of carries on to the issue of child sacrifice, like how I came to know abolition. And I saw, I always been pro-life. And I kind of always knew that abortion was this bad thing, and abortion was the killing of another human being. I knew that. I always knew it. And I just followed the advice of everybody around me. You vote Republican. You, occasionally you'll give some money to a cause. But most of the time you just make sure you vote Republican. And that was all I knew. Vote pro-life. Well, I started listening around 2016 or so. I started listening to Apologia Studios, and I learned a lot about kind of some of these doctrines related to child sacrifice, some of these doctrines related to how we should handle the law, related to how legislators and magistrates should actually handle truth and law and God's law. And it allowed me to really see these inconsistencies. He kind of exposed them to me. And so as he exposed those things to me, I became more aware that the pro-life movement really wasn't doing things right. Back then, I don't think that I necessarily knew what an abolitionist was. I don't know if I knew what abolitionism was, but these concepts I was learning a lot of them from Jeff Durbin, Apologia Studios, Luke Pearson, a lot of these guys. I very much owe a large part of my theology to them, and the way that I've grown as a man. And I appreciate them a lot for that. I think they've done a lot to really help me to understand those things. Well, come 2019, I get out of the Navy at this time. So 2016, I came to listen to a lot of Apologia. I was in the submarine force, so I listen to podcasts a lot when you're underwater and there's no internet and you just have a ton of time to just read and listen to stuff. That's what I did. So I read a ton of theology. I read a ton of scripture. I listened to a ton of Apologia. I downloaded hundreds of podcasts and greatly appreciated much of what they taught and listened to and took their recommendations for people to read and doctrine to learn. And I grew a lot from that. And so I get out of the Navy, and in 2019 there is there's a hearing for a bill to abolish abortion, and it was going to be in Texas. And I heard about it because of social media and some of the algorithm reaching out to me. And so I talked to a friend of mine, and I was like, we're definitely going to go there. Well, I guess backtrack a little bit. This church that I started attending when I got out of the Navy had a guy that went to it. His name was Ray. Awesome dude. And he was like, when I went there and we were talking about abortion, he goes, are you an abolitionist? And I was like, what's that? And he goes, well, do you believe in these certain things? And I was like, yeah. He's like, oh, well, then you're an abolitionist. And I was like, great, then I'm an abolitionist. I had no idea what the movement was or what was related to it. I just kind of knew, oh, I affirm these doctrines. I guess that's what I am. Okay. Well, we come to this 2019 hearing, and there are hundreds and hundreds of people that show up to this hearing. And at the end of the hearing, it seems to be about
300
people that spoke for the bill to pass, and only 4 who spoke against the bill to pass. And yet, the Jeff Leach, the one who was presiding over the hearing, decided not even to bring it to a vote. We'll get more into the details of a lot of that in the future. But for now, that's just kind of the way in which I came to meet abolitionists. There were people that traveled from New York, people that traveled from all over the United States to come to Texas for this hearing, because it was the first time that an abolition bill ever got a hearing. And I remember there's this one time where there's other people that I knew of that were coming in. One guy that walked in, his name was Russell Hunter, and he was bringing some people behind him, and I kind of scowled at him, actually. And the reason I scowled at him was because there was a beef at one point between some people with Apologia and some people related to Apologia. And many of those things have been put behind now. And so I don't want to drive into that. But I had been kind of like taking the ideas of other people and attributing them to myself without examining things myself and letting somebody speak for themselves. And a lot of the doctrine that we'll talk about here is directly attributed to, Russell and a lot of what he's taught and helped to establish as a movement. That a lot of people have expanded on it as a doctrine and connected it to systematic theology. And so he's not like he's not abortion abolitionism himself, but he is kind of one of the ones who pioneered the movement. And it's important to recognize that. And at the time, I was not recognizing that. And my friend Ray was like, well, whatever you think about him, brother, just know that he's done a lot more than you even know. And maybe you should think twice about that. And I did. And, now I'm good friends with Russell, and I appreciate Russell. But yeah, and so being at this hearing really allowed me to see the people of God together with one voice, fighting for one issue in a way that was powerful and prophetic. And anybody who was there will tell you that the Spirit of God was palpable. You could feel the Spirit of God. You could see the people of God coming together with this central focus, with this desire, with a mission. And you knew that it was of God, that it was something unique to the church. And yet there's people from different denominations coming together, who all believed kind of some different things, but all affirmed the same gospel and all affirmed the same image of God in humanity. So that's the moment that impacted me in such a way that sent me on a spiral towards never letting go of this issue, because I saw the importance to the church. I saw heroes of the faith, and I saw regular people who knew this is the time to stand for justice, and I'm going to show up. I'm going to do everything I can to be there. And when they did, they spoke with one voice, and they spoke in a powerful way that, again, the Spirit of God was palpable in a way that I could never forget. And I always remember and will always push me forward towards doing abolitionism and being an abolitionist. I learned a lot more later, but that was basically how I became an abolitionist and how I became a Christian. So,
Sweet. Thank you, Jacob. Guess I'll go next. And I'm Carson. I'm a what am I? I most align with Baptist ideology. I'm not quite confessional, mainly out of ignorance, not because of any particular disagreement. I go to a small little country church in the middle of North Carolina, mountain of country. So I grew up Christian. Like, I grew up in a Christian family, and my parents always took me to church. There wasn't a lot of like catechizing that happened, but I definitely learned like the core basics of Christianity, like So, and a lot of the morals and stuff were instilled in me at a pretty young age. So, I had a pretty good foundation growing up, but I was definitely I was most certainly nominal for a lot of my life. I was always swayed by just the company that I was in or the interests that I had, more so than anything. But I will say, I think I got saved, like, went up and said the prayer, saved, probably like 8 years old, I think, 8 or 9. And, I certainly didn't have one of those salvation experiences that some people have where it's like, oh yeah, like when it happens, it, and nothing's ever the same. So I didn't have that, but, I will say throughout my childhood, I definitely did have, an anchor of, morality, some some guardrails that kind of kept me in, which leads me to think that I was truly saved, but, just a little wayward at times. Ignorant and wayward, for sure. But, yeah, so, I kind of continued that way through college, just kind of, I would get interested in certain things, based on the music and TV shows and friends that I was hanging around, like, my language and my amount of time spent considering the things of God would ebb and flow. But around 2021, I was married at this point, and I stumbled across a Mike Winger video about abortion, funny enough. And that kind of introduced me to Mike Winger's channel. And that was like that was me like kind of hitting the tip of the iceberg in terms of like theology, because I wasn't catechized, or there was no deeper theology taught in my church. Certainly no like systematic theology. Finding Mike Winger's channel and then watching some of his stuff, and I was like, it initially got me into apologetics and some of the the arguments for God and stuff. A lot of evidential apologetics. So I lean more precept now, but I still kind of hold a soft spot in my heart for evidential apologetics, just because it played a role in kind of waking me up from being very nominal to actually caring about the faith and wanting to be obedient to Christ in all areas. So that kind of sparked an interest, and then this kind of like hunger was awakened. I was like, I just want to learn everything I can about theology and all this stuff. So I started listening to I had some long drives that I was making at the time, and I started listening to I know some people are gonna cringe when they hear this, but I started listening to Wayne Grudem's like systematic theology series, and that was just like fascinating to me, because I was like, there's like structure to all this, and there's a lot, like there's just so much depth here that I didn't realize was there. So I just got more and more into it, and like just a very rapid process of sanctification was happening, where I was like evaluating my practices and my life and going through all this, and then trying to actually take it more seriously and shave off things where I was being disobedient. And so then that period of time where I was just like soaking up any theology I could probably was like a year to 2 years. And then right around it would have been 2023, like early 2023, is when the Abolitionist Rising shorts started popping up on my YouTube. And like me and my wife both watched them and were interested in them. So then I went down that rabbit hole and watched all their videos and stuff. And I found myself agreeing with everything they were saying. And like I'd watch some of the lectures and stuff about the distinctives of abolitionism versus the pro-life movement. And I'd always had kind of, I don't want to say the cringy phrase like, well, I was always an abolitionist. I just didn't know it. I wasn't, because I didn't know it. You got to know about it to be one. But I will say I did have a stronger stance on abortion than most. Like I at one point had made like this really cringy and very poorly made abortion is murder hat. It was just like a white hat that I tried to use a Sharpie on. It bled and it looked embarrassing, like a kindergartner made it, so I never wore it. But I did have like a special boldness in my heart already about abortion. I just didn't have the the theological backing to come against it, other than it's murder. That was all I had. So that the abolitionist movement and the abolitionist doctrines kind of clicked fairly easily. I didn't go through a period of disliking abolitionism. So I started, feeling convicted that, I actually I can't just watch this stuff. I need to actually participate somehow. And I've always had an interest in video editing. I've ran an unsuccessful gaming YouTube channel. Don't look it up. It's a case study in sanctification. So, but I'm appreciative of it because it gave me skills that I use now. So I reached out to, ended up being Rachel at the time, because she runs the Instagram account. I sent them an Instagram DM, was like, hey, is there a way that I could, help you guys out with editing? Being completely honest, it's mainly because I ran out of videos to watch and I wanted more to watch. So I was like, well, if I edit, then I have a whole bunch of just unfettered material to watch. And she was like, yeah, sure, let me hook you up with our editor. So she hooked me up with Sam Riley. And I, kind of talked to him a little bit back and forth. I think we had a phone call, and he was like, "Yeah, let me get you hooked up with your local abolitionists." So he put me in contact with the Abolish Abortion North Carolina folks. Wayne Groover, Jen Irwin, Scott Hauser, Kyle Truman, all those guys, and had a conversation with Wayne, and I kind of told him, yeah, I'm I want to get more involved. I believe this is true. And I gave him my background. And, I told him, I was like, yeah, that street stuff, that's not really my thing. Yeah, that's not really my strong suit. So, I'm going to do the video editing because, that's where my gifts are. And he was like, nah, we're going to get you out on the street. I was like, no, I don't want. Okay, I guess. So Wayne dragged me kicking and screaming out to NC State's campus one time, like in March of 2024, and I got my first experience like doing the sidewalk thing, and I actually kind of enjoyed it. I was nervous going up there, but like once I got out there, I kind of got into it. So fast forward to the conference that was held in Charlotte, North Carolina, the Abolition Now conference, or the All on Fire. I lose track of the names. But, I helped do some of the filming and stuff for that with the AR team, and got my second round of, standing with the sign, and this time on a college campus. It was a little bit more hostile, and still enjoyed it. And I kind of wish that I had gotten to do it more. So when I got home, I was like, all right, I'm going to start taking this seriously. I'm going to like actually be active in this. I'm not just going to, think about it a lot and argue with some people on Facebook. I'm actually going to do it. So I drew me up a crappy sign, and then I just started going out in my local town every like week or two. And since then I've basically been doing that, and been helping Abolitionists Rising with some of their video editing and stuff. But yeah, that's me and how I came to faith in abolitionism.
Yeah, thanks, Carson. That was really good. Hello, my name is Jesus. I am from West Texas. Jacob mentioned talking about some of the beliefs you hold. I'm kind of unique because I hold to the 1646 London, or not London, LOL, Westminster Confession of Faith. But I currently go to a 1689 Reformed Baptist Church. So it's kind of unique, but it manages to work itself out pretty well. So for my testimony, and how I came faith in Christ, wanted to talk about the fact that I grew up in a Christian home somewhat, or a home that considered itself Christian. I was baptized just at the age of 5 years old, and assumed my entire life that I was saved. I thought being a Christian was simply about the label and upbringing I had, but as I grew older, my actions told a very different story. I began living in ways that were clearly sinful, whether it was inappropriate relationships, breaking the law, or simply having a rebellious heart and attitude. I won't go into details about all those things, but if you want to hear all the details, I'll be glad to tell you in a non-recorded message. It became obvious that my life didn't reflect the faith I've claimed. I was heading down a path of destruction, and it deeply concerned my mother at the time. In her concern, she introduced me to a man who is currently now my pastor, actually. At first, I was resistant. I remember him spending a lot of time reading the Bible and sharing wisdom from God's Word. But instead of being drawn to it, I found myself annoyed and always frustrated with him. And frankly, it wasn't with him that I was frustrated with. It was the material he was presenting to me. I started to realize real quickly that I did not take pleasure in God at all. And so, and as the time grew more and more with spending time with my current pastor, who was at the time a mentor, I just started to realize I wasn't a Christian at all. And this became more clear when I started suppressing the truth more and getting more angry with God. One night I was at my pastor's house and he was just reading straight from Romans. He would do this time to time. He would invite me over to his house and he would just read the Bible all night to me. Usually spend like 8 hours at his house, and he would just pick a portion of scripture to read from. This time it was just Romans. Out of respect, each time it was just out of respect, I would decide to listen. But I knew my heart did not care deeply about any of this stuff. But as he was going through Romans, I've noticed a particular anger that I've never felt before in my heart. I just kept feeling like the weight of anger towards God, and I just knew there was something completely missing that I was just trying to figure out. This God character really isn't somebody I enjoy at all. As he was reading through Romans, I was rather annoyed the whole time, and then he eventually got to Romans 9, and as he was reading this chapter, I have never felt so angry in my life towards God. And the more and more he would read it, my emotions would just boil over. I would just get upset. I wouldn't shout or anything, but inside my heart, I just knew I just hated God with a sincere passion. The passage obviously, talks about God showing mercy to some people and hardening others. I can go into deeper breakdown, but I don't have a lot of time to really explain all that. So just the particular part I was getting frustrated with God saying that he hardens people and he shows mercy to people. The fact that he was hardening people was aggravating to me. I thought, how is this fair? What kind of God is this? And then I remember my pastor, he was reading verse 20, and it clearly says, and at first I thought it was him telling me this, but it turns out he was just reading God's word. He says, "But who are you, oh man, to answer back to God?" I remember thinking in my head, I thought he was talking to me, so I felt insulted at first. He's like, "I'm just reading the word." And I just thought in that moment, how completely shattered I was. Immediately, it just felt like a light switch. I went from absolutely hating God to feeling broken. In that moment, my entire perspective on life, my faith, and God was just turned upside down. My view of God was just turned upside down. For the first time in my life, I fully saw how broken weak I was before the Lord. It was just completely obvious that I knew I was a sinner and I need God's grace. That night, I went home and cried out to God. I begged Him to save me, to give me a new heart. And in that moment, I believe He did. He opened my eyes to His mercy and grace, and I placed my faith in Christ alone for salvation that night. I want to say this was about, I don't have the exact date of what this happened. I know the moment in time. I would say it's about 6 or 7 years ago. I would say since then, God has been at work in my life in incredible ways. He has given me new desires to love Him, to seek, to honor Him, and to live for His glory. The growth I've experienced and the confidence I now have in my salvation are an undeniable evidence of His grace. I know my greatest hope, both in this life and the next, is knowing that God saved a sinner like me. Not only did He save me, but He also uses me for His purposes. That's the greatest blessing I can ask for, and I'm excited to see how He will continue to use me in the years to come. And I think just even within that, as I'm going to the next part of my testimony when it comes to abolition, like just the growth I've experienced just in doing evangelism and doing, the work of abolition. It took a while for even just my sanctification growing into understanding that when I began to care deeply about abortion, it was after I heard a sermon that Jeff Durbin had preached. I want to say it was at ReformCon. I don't remember exactly where it was at, but I remember seeing it online. It was on Isaiah 1. And I remember he spent a lot of time weeping. And I was just like kind of already convicted just by the fact that he knows this passage is just a weighty passage. First time ever hearing Isaiah preached or even like read. I wasn't really an Old Testament guy up until like 3 years ago. And when he had read and preached Isaiah 1, I was already feeling convicted. I was like, what is going on here? Like, this is just a reflection of our country now. And I just thought, like, he's relating this to abortion, and it makes complete sense. The message was very convicting, and I actually felt called by that, in that message to get involved. At the time, I was just considered pro-life work. I don't remember the time frame of all this. I want to say a year later, because I was trying to figure out ways to get involved other than just local evangelism, maybe how to get involved with organizations and maybe politically. But I just knew, like, I just needed to tell people, like, abortion's murder, and you should treat it as such, and you should, start telling people about this stuff. That was just kind of my conviction at the time. Maybe it was more like agitation before I even realized it was agitation. I was just going out telling people the gospel and saying, hey, we live in a wicked world where they allow abortion up to this. I was very vocal about it. Kind of, I think it was probably more radical understanding for me than maybe like the 5 points of Calvinism was. Like, I was more passionate about abortion than I was probably Calvinism. At the time I was, and still am. I think I'm still very passionate about, abolition stuff and abortion, doing away with it. And so, past that time, I listened to that sermon. I got connected with a group called Sanctuary Cities for the Unborn. A lot of abolitionists would know this. I would say like John Speed, and I don't know who else would know directly, but John Speed's the one that kind of put this organization together to begin with. There's a lot of history there that I don't know all the ins and outs of, but John Speed would know more than me. I happened to work with a guy named Mark Lee Dixon. I kind of took over and maybe arguably hijacked the whole organization or movement, whatever you want to call it. But anyways, that's another story for another time. I just kind of want to explain my involvement with it and how I kind of transitioned over to abolition. So I started participating in pro-life efforts, and I honestly believed I was doing my part to help in abortion, or abolish abortion, you should say. When I was working with Mark, I would do my best to go around to get signatures. I would do my best to educate people, spend multiple hours rather traveling, going to city council offices, educating people in my town or other towns to get on board with this stuff, because this stuff would, if the state or federal government doesn't want to end abortion, we should strive to do it in our town, and maybe that puts some pressure in our states to do, to actually abolish abortion. And then as my involvement grew, I started to encounter individuals at the time. I don't remember if Jacob was a part of this. I feel like he was. I feel like Jacob's always been a part of anything related to my Christian walk from my start of Reformed theology, but I can't remember exactly. But I remember like John Speed and Sarah Cleveland were two people I always found myself really, what's the word? They started like challenging my inconsistencies. And frankly, I just, frankly, they were just challenging my inconsistencies, and at the time, I would just struggle with their criticism. In fact, I would just even find myself disliking them and having like a real hatred for them, which pushed me away from abolitionism at the time. Even despite the fact that I believe they were probably right, I just thought like these people are divisive. These people don't want to be open to other ideas. They just want to be so close-minded and whatever you want to call it. And so it was just kind of a long like tug and pull. But I started to feel convicted about it, but I just didn't know for sure what they were saying was true. And so I remember back in 2021, I had decided with one of my buddies to go to Oklahoma to find out what was really going on with this movement. I wanted to give it a fair share. Have grown anger and cold, and I thought these people are Christians. I should at least give them the benefit of the doubt and see what it's all about. So in 2021, I attended Abolition Day. Got to see firsthand my first experience at any capital in the United States. I hadn't even been to my state capital at the time yet. And so I got to see firsthand what these legislators were doing, the pro-life movement was doing, and then also see the abolition at work. And that experience had changed everything for me. From witnessing, I think the day before, the shadiness of the pro-life movement to kill an abolition bill, complete shock to me, the most pro-life state in the Union, killing an abolition bill, and not only doing that, but being shady about it. From the next day, attending with, I don't know how much Christians were out there, abolitionists, but there was quite a few, and it was like 8 degrees, freezing cold. And frankly, I was just thinking like, and these people really not only like profess this stuff, they actually care about this stuff deeply. We're out here hearing testimony, we're out here to go to the front doors of these legislators and proclaim this truth. I ain't never seen nothing like this in any pro-life work. I thought it was just phenomenal. I'm like, I mean, obviously I was just thinking like, there's something unique and different about these people. They care about this issue. Not only do they care about it, they want to honor God in it. Everything's God, everything's scripturally grounded. Everything wants to, focus its reality on that. And so when I started to see this distinct differences, and also when they would go to legislators, I was just kind of witnessing what was going on. Like Christians were being rejected by pro-life Christian legislators, quote unquote. And I was just like, wow, like what is going on here? Why does the pro-life movement not want to end abortion? Like it presented before them. Like surely there's something going on. And I remember like attending, like I'm witnessing firsthand. I'm like, surely this is just like a once in a, like this only happens once. Surely this isn't a theme across the whole pro-life movement. And I remember attending that conference that night, and from Dusty Devers, Russell Hunter, the Russell Hunter, Jeff Durbin, which he spoke on why pro-life people were keeping laws legal in Arizona. And I forgot who the other one was. Oh, Bradley Pierce. They all did a presentation on abolition to some degree. each one being a little different. Dusty doing the 5 tenets of abolition, phenomenal stuff. I was starting to see it flowing through the Bible, everything that he was saying. Russell giving a historical relation of abolitionism versus gradualism, from incrementalism to abolition, and how in the slave days there was the gradualists that wanted to gradually get rid of slavery, and incrementalists adopting the same strategy. And then Bradley doing why you should call yourself an abolitionist and why the pro-life movement has kept abortion legal for like 48 years at the time. I mean, it's still legal today, but at that time it was 48 years. And then Jeff Durbin exposing what was, or kind of not exposing, but I think just giving a post-millennial hope for Christians to care about justice and truth within the political realm and go to the gates to be biblical. And the pro-life movement was being secular about these things. And surely I was just like, that night I was driving home at like at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. I was telling my buddy, I was like, this makes too much sense. I, as a Christian, could not help but be drawn to a movement that's sought up to hold God's principles and pursues justice without compromise. Like, it just made complete sense. And from then, I have just been. I said 2021 when this took place. I don't think it happened in 2020. I think it was 2021 when SB 495 was put into place in Oklahoma, and then experiencing Abolition Day, being around other abolitionists. I started to realize like people like Sarah Cleveland and John Speed were right, and I was wrong, and I was foolish to really have righteous anger towards them. It was actually really great to reconcile with them because they've been. Sarah Cleveland not so much anymore. She's kind of, I don't know where she is nowadays. But John Speed has been a real good friend to me over these last few years. Even the little differences we might have today, I still have appreciated John and all that he's done for and to help me, just be like a godly voice that I can look up to. He's been a very respectable man to follow and to understand and to seek wisdom from. And just the amount of people that I've just been able to be connected through, it's just great to see a bunch of Christians get together and not only fight for something that's truthful and biblical and gospel centered, but we can do it together. Like Jacob was mentioning, where there's all these differences, whether it's, somebody's a Free Will Baptist, someone's a Reformed Baptist, somebody's a Presbyterian, or, I mean, there's even people that are vegans, but we all manage to get along and, do good Christian work together. And so, with that all be saying, that's my testimony, my abolition testimony. And I'm looking forward to talking further along the more and more we do these podcasts about abolition stuff for his glory.
Carson is not a vegan.
Not a vegan.
Who said it was about Carson?
Yeah, I guess I'll go next because I'm the last person of the bunch. My name is Shane. I am a Reformed Baptist 1689er that doesn't go to a 1689 church. I go to a Southern Baptist church that is not beholden to the 1689 but is Calvinistic. So yeah, that makes all four of us in four different church situations, which is fun. And just as an aside, shows the unity of the abolitionist movement, that we all are part of different types of churches that hold to the same gospel. So I grew up in a nominal family. Like, I don't know if nominal Christian is the right term. My grandpa was a Christian. As far as I can tell, he was a Lutheran, and my parents would bring me to church to attend with him, not because they thought it was a good thing, but because it was my grandpa that was there. And so I grew up going there when I was younger, and then around seventh grade or so, we moved from South Dakota to Minnesota, and then I didn't go to church every Sunday. I only went to church when I went back home to Minnesota or back to South Dakota to see my grandpa, and I would go to church with him. My favorite part of that was just the Mountain Dew in the fridge and Burger King on the way to church. But otherwise, I really did not like church. I thought it was the most boring thing ever, and I believe I remember myself telling myself that if I ever get a chance to choose to go to church or not to go to church, I will choose not to go to church. And so I just really didn't like it. It was the most boring thing ever to me. And then fast forward to like being in Minnesota, not really going to church much often anymore. About my sophomore year of high school or junior year, one of the two, I get invited to some bonfires with some people from school that were all a part of the same youth group. And then through that, I was able to be invited to youth group at a church, at an evangelical free church, by a girl I had a crush on. And I mean, I like this person had so much to do with me, like just coming to church things. There was one time she asked me if I believed in um, evolution or creationism, or God, like God or evolution. And I said, because I was trying not to be cornered, and I said, well, I guess I believe in both of them. And she got really upset with me. She said, how could you ever believe that? That's so dumb, you know. And I just felt really dumb because I didn't impress her. But I ended up going to youth group. Again, like I hated the music because it was very boring again, and the teaching was very boring to me. But I really liked the people that I was with in the youth group and continued to go pretty often. My motivations were probably not great because I was pretty much going because she was going, and so I kept going. And then through that youth group, I learned about summer camp in the summer, and so I ended up signing up for that. Went to that camp, and during that camp, I heard what I believe is the clearest gospel up to that point that I've heard before. And we were asked to, you know, raise our hand, that whole spiel, raising your hand, praying a prayer. And so I did that, and then afterwards told people about it. They all cheered about it. I thought it was the weirdest yet like most comforting thing I've ever experienced before up to that point. And so that's when I first professed to be a Christian. And time leading up to that, and even after, like I was getting into sin and all these things. And even afterwards, one evidence I think I had that I was a Christian is I was engaging in some of the same sins I did before, but I had conviction that I did not have before. And so I cut off certain relationship with a woman that I didn't think was healthy at the time. um, and uh, and so that was some fruit of I believe my profession of faith and regeneration. And so but after I left that camp, I did not really go to church, like the church service every week. I still go into youth group some Wednesdays, except for when like sports got in the way of that. And then fast forwarding to my first year of college, I ended up kind of linking arms with and like kind of following around some of the people that I met at that same camp that went to the same college that were a year or two older than me. And they were involved with some ministries, and so I got involved with those ministries that they were involved with because they were my friends, and I knew them and trusted them. But even the first semester of college, I was involved with some of those ministries on campus and going to their meetings and stuff like that. But I was also getting involved with the fraternity scene, and so I got involved with the fraternity life a bit. I went to parties and all this stuff. I never had a problem with like alcohol consumption, but I was certainly like a womanizer and certainly went after all the women very often. Went to the dances for them and all the stuff. And ended up going way too far with one of them one night, and that was like the bottom of the barrel for me. And so a few weeks later, though, after that happened, there was this winter conference that was happening with one of those ministries I was a part of in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And so I went to that. And at this conference, the whole week, there's a theme of the messages that are happening, and it's kind of this like college student thing where they're trying to just for non-believers there, they're just trying to introduce you to Christ and like encourage you with like why you can trust in Christ and all these things. And so I don't remember entirely what the main message was this night, but after the main message was over, the person kind of leading the times kind of just said like turn to someone you trust and confess your sins to them. And so I turned to my friend Andrew, and I turned to him and I just confessed those sins from that first semester that I was just jumping into. And and he looked at me with just a lot of grace. He shared with me his sins as well. There was a brother from South Sudan that was also there that was a Christian, and he shared his testimony and his sins, and we confessed all three of us together. And there was just this huge like weight just taken off of me. And that was the first time I think I experienced true confession and what it looked like to confess my sins and actually understand grace in a more tangible way. And so from there, from then on, I mean, I learned about some opportunities to go share the gospel on the beaches in Florida, Panama City Beach, Florida. Ended up doing that all 5 years of being in college, and then one summer I go to South Carolina, just being trained in how to share the gospel even more for a whole summer, and then I went to China one summer to be a missionary for 6 weeks. And so very early on in becoming a Christian, um, evangelism was a huge part of that, which it should be for all Christians. But I was just in a organization that just like thrived on, we do evangelism. That's what we do. It's our bread and butter. My friend Andrew, though, while we were there, while I was in college, he was the first person to show me the importance of the local church. And so I was kind of like, pretty, um, I didn't go to church all the time. And he just challenged me and he said, no, we need to be in the church. We need to be churchmen. And I really, really appreciate him pushing me in that direction, because it actually, I think, it actually kept me from certain problems that I might have had in the future if I would have just put all my marbles in like this ministry that I was a part of. So I graduate college, and I go and be a missionary in Turkey. And this kind of is about to get me into abolition stuff and becoming I don't know, activist against abortion. But I go to Turkey as a missionary, and while I'm there, I'm already listening to like Jeff Durbin, like some of these other guys have said. But he has this video, and I think it might be the same one Jesus was talking about, but at the end of the video, he brings out a baby that was saved through their abortion ministry. After he shares this whole, or preaches this whole sermon on like establishing justice and like speaking for those who are destitute, and all these things. And I just remember being like, I really, when I get back to America, I want to be a part of doing that type of ministry. And rewind, the earliest time I remember in my mind of like having a short debate about abortion is with a brother of mine in one of those ministries. I remember him saying something along the lines of like, well, if it's like rape or something like that, we can, like, I think that's some of the exceptions. And I remember speaking against that idea pretty early on. I remember having friends go to the abortion clinics in South Dakota, and I never joined them. I thought about it, never did. And so it was kind of like well, that's the status quo, and I just seemed to accept it as I look back on that. but I listened to that Jeff Durbin message, and then I see like End Abortion Now putting out a call to action video. I share it with my team in Turkey, and I actually lead us through a prayer time of it while we were in Turkey as a team. And then so fast forward to coming back to America, I get involved with my church, and um, like within weeks, I find out about a ministry that's connected to my church that does pro-life work at the abortion mill here in Louisville, Kentucky. So now I'm in Louisville, Kentucky after moving back from Turkey. And I go to a dinner where I get to learn about what they're doing and when they do it and like what they do. And so I started going with them at the abortion mill on Saturday mornings, just kind of learning for a whole year. I think I just followed along with people and just kind of paid attention to what they were doing. And then one day I just am told, "Hey, could you lead some people?" Having never opened my mouth down there before. And I start I just say yes. I didn't even say like I've never done that, you know. So I just say yes, and I lead some people to try to start conversations with people, with women and their whoever they're with on the way to the door. And so I start getting more and more like comfortable with it, and I start saying some of the things I've learned from like Jeff Durbin. Like I start using the word murder, and I start saying things that like are just truthful of what's happening there. And I was met with some pushback from the pro-life organization telling me we don't use the word murder. We don't do that. And I had an argument with them a little bit where I was like, well, isn't it murder? Why you believe it's murder? I know you do because you're go to my church and we believe it's murder. So why wouldn't I use the word murder? That's the truth. And they said, yeah, well, we just don't use that here. And eventually, after having conversation after conversation about that, I just told them, I don't know if this is a ministry I really want to be involved with, then if we're not going to be using biblical language. They were a ministry that was preaching the gospel in a lot of ways, but they just didn't like certain words being used. And so while I'm there, I'm also seeing some street preachers preaching outside of the clinic, and I really like how they're doing it. The gospel message, they're not like they're not like being soft with their language. They're being very forward and honest. And I start joining with them a little bit while I'm doing some sidewalk counseling with this other organization. I'm also kind of watching them, and I actually end up joining them. And I start preaching with them, and they start encouraging me with the what language I'm using as well. And along around like 2020, I start to like listen to some other podcasts. I've already been with Jeff Durbin, kind of paying attention to what he's doing, and I love it, and actually, while I was in Turkey, going rewinding again, I saw a video of him at the Louisville clinic doing ministry to at the abortion mill, and I saw that actually while I was still in Turkey, and so that was another catalyst to get me to want to be involved with something like that. But in 2020, I don't remember if I came across Abolition Day for Oklahoma through Jeff Durbin's podcast, Apologia, or if I actually came across Free the States at the time. I can't remember which one was which, but I learned about the Abolition Day in Oklahoma, and me and my buddy Justin, who was hurt from work, so he couldn't work. So I said, hey, let's just go down to this rally in Oklahoma. And so we drove the 14 hours down, 12 to 14 hours down to Oklahoma City. We went to this rally, and to open the rally, 8 degrees. It's the same one Jesus was at. 2021 was this rally. Um, to open the rally up, Dusty Devers points at the Capitol and says that laws to murder babies are written here. And he says it again, like as passionate as the first time. And that kind of, I was already with the abolitionists, I think, because through the other podcast, but that really just sealed it for me. And I think the rest of it is kind of history. We'll talk more about that in these other podcasts, but that's really where I got involved. And I'll just say this. So a few months later, I start doing my job delivering ice, and I don't really have a lot of time to like do anything outside of just working 6 days a week. And so I listened to all 118 episodes of the Liberator podcast from Free the States at the time, and just really educated myself on how to talk abolition language and how to argue and what is the history and what has happened. And that really solidified me as an abolitionist to be able to argue as an abolitionist instead of arguing as the pro-lifer that I may have argued like before. So yeah, that's kind of that's me. So
Well, everybody, thanks so much for listening. We hope you were encouraged by our stories. And if you are a Christian, that you are reminded of the most important person in our life, Christ, and how we here at Chronicles of a Cult all came to understand the most important love your neighbor issue in the world today, child sacrifice. If you're not a Christian, we pray the stories of God's grace and mercy to us are convicting to you, and that you repent of your opposition to Christ, your King. Next episode, we will be discussing what is abolitionism. So if some of these kind of stories to come to understand this stuff caught your attention and you want to know what it's all about, we're going to give a big picture view of what the movement is and what the roots are for it. So thanks for joining us.
and just so you know, Brian Fox, this is Jacob, Jesus, Carson, and Shane.